Stars in My Crown is a 1950 Western drama based on the novel of the same name by Joe David Brown. It stars Joel McCrea and was directed by Jacques Tourneur. The film follows the life of a small-town minister in the post-Civil War South, told from the perspective of his young nephew. Stars in My Crown is a movie that, ever since I first watched it a few years ago, quickly elevated itself to being one of my favorites of Joel McCrea's long filmography. And upon this rewatch, I still hold it in such high regard. A big reason I love older movies from the 30s, 40s, or 50s is the strong morals that they contain. You can argue that that was forced upon certain movies by the Hays Code or the censors or what have you, but the fact is, so many movies from those decades contain wonderful messages and themes, hence why movies from that period were so perfect for me to grow up on and why I love them to this day. But even with that, there were relatively few films that dealt with faith and Christianity as the main focal point of the story. Today we have Pure Flix or some other production companies as well that strictly make faith-based movies. But back then, those companies and producers didn't exist, which makes it all the more interesting that this film was made by MGM and starred a major name like Joel McCrea. Joel McCrea plays Josiah Gray, formerly of the Confederate Army, now working as a parson in the small town of Walesburg. I thought he was excellent in the role. Joel McCrea always brought such dignity and gravitas to the roles he played, and it's that which makes him such perfect casting for a minister like this. And I love this character himself. This is a man that spreads the Christian message through his actions and through conversations with the people he meets. He's never pushy, he's not confrontational with others, just inviting. And at the same time, there is such bravery to him, where he'll stand up for others when the rest of the crowd won't, and he won't back down from controversy. There's also an aspect to this character where we see him struggling with his faith and unsure about what his role should be in the town during a crisis. And that's important because not that long before, we see his wife describing Josiah Gray as a man without flaws. Basically that she found the perfect man to marry when she met him. And then the movie contrasts that with him shutting the doors of the church, not continuing services, and withdrawing into himself rather than trusting in God. It could have been easy to present a character that is almost saint-like, but the movie makes sure to ground him as a man that sometimes makes bad choices, doesn't always have the answers himself, and it makes for a well-rounded and compelling character when we watch him have his faith reinvigorated. His wife is played by Ellen Drew, and I thought she was so good as well. It's a very supportive character trying to encourage her husband, and Ellen Drew gives us a very engaging character, but also one where the pressures and stress of this same crisis I mentioned, a typhoid outbreak, wear her down and push her to the breaking point. And it's in those moments where her husband has to encourage and support her. I love the whole picture of their marriage. We see them in good times, bantering back and forth about picking hymns for Sunday morning, and also in the bad, trying to comfort one another. And Jacques Tourneur makes sure to include little moments that just subtly, but also deliberately, show the strength of their marriage. Things like a brief insert shot of Joel McCrea stopping and waving goodbye as he heads down the front walkway of their house, or him removing her slippers for her as they get ready for bed. Small things like that just build this relationship for us, the audience, and establish the foundation they have at home, even when the world around them is in turmoil. Dean Stockwell plays the young nephew, and he's quite good. As I said, the movie is from his perspective, and an adult version of that character narrates the film, especially in the earlier scenes. Okay, now I'll get into the many side characters. There are a lot of them, and I'd like to mention pretty much everyone, so I'll try to do it quickly. Alan Hale Sr. plays an old war buddy of Josiah Gray's, and he could play a part like this in his sleep, but he's great. He's blustery, good-natured, but also very steadfast in his intentions to avoid church attendance as long as he can. You immediately get the sense when he and Joel McCrea are speaking that Josiah Gray's invitation to church is a constant part of their conversations. Alan Hale tries to ignore it, but McCrea keeps trying, and neither man is offended by the other. It builds that friendship very well and establishes their backstory very quickly. Lewis Stone shows up in a small role as the aging town doctor. I love Lewis Stone. He's most famous for his role as Judge Hardy, the father of Mickey Rooney's Andy Hardy in the long-running series of Hardy family movies. I'm a huge fan of that series, and Lewis Stone's dignified presence is a big part of that. His character here is a lot gruffer than Judge Hardy ever was, but he's just as endearing. You almost get the feeling that Joel McCrea is just sitting back and letting this veteran actor go to town in their scenes together. and they're a good pair on screen. James Mitchell plays the son of Louis Stone's character, also a doctor, who's come home to care for his father and ends up taking over his practice. He's definitely not a likable character, with almost no bedside manner, but James Mitchell plays him very well, really leaning into the antagonistic nature of this man. He's trying to create his own reputation and wants to separate from his father's more folksy and friendly way of practicing medicine. It's this character that almost becomes the main villain against Joel McCrea, and the two of them are given some very interesting scenes to play. The young doctor is a man who has no use for faith, and butts heads with McCrea several times when a dying patient asks to see the minister. There's a great dynamic there where both men need to learn to trust each other and try to understand the purpose that they have, although James Mitchell definitely has more understanding to do than Joel McCrea. There's also an element of them meeting at many of the same houses during moments of pain or grief, and that is explored very nicely. Amanda Blake plays the town schoolteacher. Now, of course, she's most famous for her nearly 2 decades of playing Miss Kitty on Gunsmoke, and this movie was made 5 years prior to that series' first season. But what is so fun is the fact that Matt Dillon himself, James Arness, is also in the movie, playing one of Alan Hale's sons. The two of them don't speak to one another, but they are both present for 2 of the same scenes, a funeral and a church service, so I thought that was pretty interesting, seeing them in the same film before Gunsmoke came into being. But Amanda Blake is very good too. She's so young and sweet and is the love interest of James Mitchell's character. Juano Hernandez plays Uncle Famous, an older, freed slave who becomes quite a major part of the movie later on, and I thought he was excellent. He has such natural charm and a down-home attitude and steals several scenes from both Joel McCrea and Dean Stockwell. Ed Begley plays a nefarious general store operator and mine owner. He's a fairly standard bad guy, but he plays the part well. Charles Kemper turns up in a fun role as a traveling magician and snake oil salesman. It's a very brief part, but he's very interesting, dressed as a short, rotund Buffalo Bill Cody or something like that. Sadly, Charles Kemper actually died the same year this movie came out. His entire feature film career was only 6 years, from 1945 until his final film, released in 1951. But in that time, he appeared in some great films. John Ford's Wagon Master, Yellow Sky, Fury at Furnace Creek, and his final movie, the classic noir On Dangerous Ground. Not a bad list of movies to be a part of. Jack Lambert, a career bad guy, shows up here in that same type of role, a bully with a fondness for a bullwhip. He always had such a recognizable face. And finally, Arthur Honeycutt appears as the unfortunately named Chloroform Wiggins. He's a little hard to recognize without his beard, and I kept thinking that he looked so young in this movie, but I think he was 40 at the time it came out. As I said at the start, the movie was directed by Jacques Tourneur, and he's such a great director. A lot of people now might remember him best for the horror films that he directed in the 1940s, but to me, his best work was in the 3 films he made with Joel McCrea and the great Out of the Past, starring Robert Mitchum. I've mentioned that movie many times on this channel. It's one of the greatest film noirs ever made. But with Joel McCrea, he made not only this, but also Wichita and Stranger on Horseback, which both came out in 1955. Wichita is another favorite of mine, telling the story of Wyatt Earp's early career in Kansas. That one also has Peter Graves as one of the Earp brothers. I just love it. And Stranger on Horseback is this little movie with Joel McCrea playing a judge that goes up against John McIntyre. It's barely over an hour, it's shot in Sedona, it's fantastic. Check it out. Jacques Tourneur, together with cinematographer Charles Schoenbaum, give us some beautiful images in this movie. I'm thinking of shots like the overhead shot of the townspeople gathered at a hillside cemetery for a funeral, or especially the use of oil lamps to light scenes set at the minister's house. So often in westerns from back then, we see lamps lit, but the scenes look too bright, likely from shooting on a soundstage with an abundance of other lights close at hand, and I'm not sure if the visuals here were all achieved with just lamps or not. Probably not, but the effect is gorgeous. The light is sometimes harsh, being very bright on someone's face as they pass by, but it also produces dramatic shadows and gives beautiful backlighting to the characters. That, combined with shots through bedroom doors or with staircases, the movie looks excellent. Also, the way he chose to execute the scene where Joel McCrea goes to pray over a character who's dying is wonderful. It could be a hard scene to pull off with where it goes, but Jacques Tourneur does it so skillfully. It's captured in a wide shot at first, with McCrea nearly in silhouette kneeling by the bedside, and then the wind begins to move the curtains through the open window, and the rest of the scene plays out in silence, other than the swelling music, completing the arc of another character without the need for dramatic dialogue. I don't want to spoil it for those who haven't seen it, so that's why I'm being vague. The movie is interesting in the way it plays out, because it doesn't seem like there's an overarching plot much of the time. There are little vignettes illustrating life in this town through the eyes of a child, but as the movie continues on, two plot lines emerge that carry us to the end of the film. One being the typhoid outbreak, and the other being someone trying to run Uncle Famous off his land. That second story does get quite dark, with some residents of the town becoming somewhat Ku Klux Klan-styled night riders, but that balances out moments that could be seen as overly sentimental by some. There are two scenes back-to-back at the end that are both wonderful. The first is so well acted by Joel McCrea, and there's a reveal at the end that you kind of know is coming, but even still, the confirmation is still a nice surprise. And the final scene wraps up everything so nicely and is truly a feel-good ending. And that's what I think makes this movie so great. So much of it is a feel-good story about a man trying to use his faith to better his community and influence the people he meets to strive to do better themselves. So, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend Stars in My Crown. You won't be disappointed. Thanks for watching my review. If you enjoyed it, I hope you'll check out some more of my reviews on Hildebrand Productions. Thanks again, and adios for now.